Here we are again, Uncolored Podcast. Thanks for showing up. I'm Kevin Metcalf. Let's jump right into it. Today I wanted to talk about, again, I've been talking about the objectivity of morality. That's what I assert has to be true. The first and second idea offer two different possibilities. Morality is either objective under the first idea, because you have an ultimate standard, that being God. The first idea asserts the existence of God. The second idea, however, asserts that the first idea is false. And so there, you tend to get into more of a relativistic way of thinking, because there's no objective standard for judging things like right and wrong, good and bad. It becomes more of a subjective thing. Now, many people don't believe that. They disagree with that. Many people who don't believe God exists says, yeah, we can have a moral code. But oftentimes, I think what oftentimes happens more often is atheists say there's really just no such thing as morality. Now, when I've been studying this stuff, and only for a few years, I'm just scratching the surface. But in the 6 and 7 years I've been really digging into this stuff, there's all kinds of ideas, all kinds of isms and anti-isms. In this debate that I'm going to show you with Stephen Hicks and Thaddeus Russel, I think comes out one of the dumbest ideas that I've ever heard. No, I shouldn't say dumb. It's the least plausible idea that I've ever heard of all the ideas that I've heard while studying these philosophies here. But it's a very popular one. So, without further ado, Thaddeus Russel is a postmodernist. Teaches postmodernism in college. He's a professor at some college and teaches postmodernism to his students. And Stephen Hicks is a professor who he seems to be, a liberal thinker in the enlightenment, loves Ayn Rand, a business guy, freedom, liberty, independent, free thought, those kinds of things. Now, full disclosure, I'm a Stephen Hicks guy. Love Stephen Hicks. Love his books, love his talks. If you want to know anything about postmodernism, socialism, Marxism, he's the guy. He knows everything about it. So in this debate, he kind of, in my opinion, he destroys Thaddeus Russel, in my opinion. But I encourage you to watch the whole thing for yourself. You come to your own conclusions. But as far as I'm concerned, Stephen Hicks just destroys the guy. But there's a problem, and we'll get to that at the end. So first, I'm going to give you Stephen Hicks, and he's talking to Thaddeus Russel. This is towards the end, and they're kind of in a back and forth talking about postmodernism. Here he's talking about the problem that you have with certain events if you adhere to postmodernism. So
just another question for Thaddeus. Part of Thaddeus's first round of argumentation was to point out the terrible state abuses of power in psychiatry with respect to gays, Jews, women, and so forth. So my question would be, do you think that those were morally wrong abuses of state power, or do you think that it's a narrative interpretation that you believe that those things are wrong, but there are other alternative narrations that could justify the state use of power against blacks, Jews, women, and so forth?
Right. So morality to me is a form of superstition. So it is the idea that something applies, again, to all people at all times and all places forever. Right. That is a religious idea. I hope that's clear. I hope it's clear. You can't prove that. You can't disprove it either. But that is a hell of an arrogant claim that is very similar to what you find in the Bible, isn't it? Right? That something is going to apply eternally to all people in all places. I find that incredibly arrogant. Now, does this mean that I am not opposed to slavery? No. I don't want to live in a society that has slavery in it because of my values. That's a different thing than morality. So what I tell people, and I've told my students this for decades, don't worry about what is morally good or morally wrong. Figure out what you want, what you value. And as a Randian objectivist, you should appreciate this. It's the politics of self-interest that I'm preaching here. If you want to live in a society that includes slavery, I'm going to fight you. if you're going to try to impose that on me, right? If you want to not live in a society with slavery, that's all you need. You don't need to make moral claims, do you? If you don't want to live in a society that includes slavery, you would have picked up a gun in 1861 and gone down south, maybe. Or you would simply have refused, by force of arms, the entrance of slave states into the North. So just figure out what you want and move from there politically.
So, as you hear, Thaddeus Russel, when he gets pinned down, Hicks says, are these things wrong? Slavery, the Holocaust, you name it, whatever you call it. Are these things objectively wrong? That's what he's asking. Thaddeus Russel, again, playing word games, that's what postmodernists do. He says, listen, I don't like it, right? So according to postmodernism, these things aren't objectively wrong, right? If you don't like it, you just don't like it. But if you do like it, that's also okay. Doesn't matter if you're a postmodernist. If you like slavery, the Holocaust, rape, murder, incest, all those things are okay if you can fight for them and get the power to impose those things into society. Because with a postmodernist, it's whatever you want. And I have long asserted this. Well, I'm saying long, but since I've been studying this thing, that's the one thing that's become clear to me. Once you remove God, there is no such thing as right and wrong. There are just things I like and things I don't like. And how do I get them? It becomes a power struggle for who can impose their likes and dislikes on other people. That's all it is. And if you get into a circumstance that you don't like, if people impose rules on you that you don't like, too bad. It's not wrong. Not if you're a postmodernist. It's just something that you don't like. And so now you have to now fight and get power. So now you can impose yourself on other people. That's the whole idea about postmodernism. There isn't wrong. There's just things you like. So now in this next clip, he's going to go further and go a little bit deeper into the whole postmodernism idea Stephen Hicks does.
The postmodern theory of language is that language is a social construct. How terms are defined is arbitrarily as a result of tradition. That applies universally, and that is a universalistic claim. But then that just means that, and all of the analytic and skeptical continental thinkers that the postmoderns are drawing on when they are getting their first-rate PhD education say explicitly, logical truths are true only because we have decided to make them true. It's a subjective projection. The truths of mathematics and how we have defined the axioms are true only because we have stipulated them to be so. They don't say anything about the way things are out in the world.
I would challenge Stephen or anyone else to find any of these postmodernist thinkers that we've discussed saying anything like that.
I will send the quotation.
Okay.
Because now in this clip, what comes to bear here is the postmodern idea of truth. Again, there's no such thing. Truth is something that you make up, right? Now, what's interesting, and hopefully I can get this, I plan to get into this idea in a future podcast, but there's a problem once you move into the second idea. Once you get rid of God, the problem that atheists have, in my opinion, is there are these things that are real. Truth, love, right, wrong. But there's no explanation for them. They just exist. Origins seem to be a problem for atheism as it appears to me. There's no explanation in atheism where the universe came from. There's no explanation under atheism, which would give you, naturalism. I'm assuming naturalism as an atheist, but not all atheists are naturalists. But naturalism and materialism which is usually the go-to, metaphysic of atheists. There's no explanation for human beings. There's no explanation for the beginning of the universe. There's no explanation for consciousness. But there's also no explanation for right and wrong, or good or bad. And when you ask atheists about these things, they come up with some evolutionary theory that doesn't explain the beginning of it. It usually comes about something like, well, they emerged. right? Or it's an emergent property. And when they really get backed into a corner, they just call it a brute fact. But the brute fact, in my opinion, the emergent property, and it just emerged, is the atheist's God of the gaps. I don't know how it happened, just must have evolved through random processes. Don't know how. This truth concept, the idea that we make up truth, that's I shouldn't say that has to be true. That's a problem for atheism. What makes something true? So what it seems to me is postmodernism takes the God doesn't exist idea and simply takes it to its logical conclusion, right? As silly as I think it is, I think it logically follows if God isn't real. And that's the problem for Stephen Hicks, in my opinion. Like I said, I agree with him. I think he's fantastic. Again, his ideas of individuality and the supremacy of the individual rights, individual freedom. I love all of that, and I agree with him 100%. The problem for Stephen Hicks, in my opinion, and I think the whole enlightenment philosophy is, where does it come from? Why should I believe that you should be free if there's no source of that freedom? It's a difficult concept to say, to explicate. I didn't want to use that word, but that's all I came up with. It's a difficult concept to articulate. But if there isn't an objective standard of right and wrong, if there's no objective source for truth or for what's right or for what's wrong, it seems to me that postmodernism is correct. What makes something moral? If you don't have something as a standard by which to judge that. I think I talked about in a previous podcast. I don't know what this is. But in a previous video, I explained that, if you have north, an objective, focal point, then you can know what isn't north and what is north. But if you're floating in outer space, how do you know? And to me, atheism kind of floats in outer space. There's no objective standard for these things, but at the same time, we know these things are real. So in my opinion, while I agree with Stephen Hicks 100%, if he's right, Stephen Hicks is an atheist, Stephen Hicks denies the existence of God, then the postmodernist is actually correct. Here's another part where they're talking about, this guy cracks me up. And this is why I think this is totally wrong. So one of the guys, they're doing the Q&A thing, and somebody stands up, and this is what he says.
It's at the distinction between your views, which is that absolutes exist and absolutes don't exist. So there is an epistemic split between subject and object in the universe. People perceive things subjectively. There is no objective observer. God was invented to be the objective observer. But because there is no objective observer, there are no absolutes. There can be no absolute truth. And when you talk about morality, it's just silly because morality developed as a way for people to cooperate in groups and to have rules of behavior. So if you're a moral realist, it's really just silly because morality differs in every different culture and group.
Comment, Thaddeus?
I second what you said. I
Okay.
don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
Okay. Listen, that's impossible, right? It's, again, I think it's a very popular thing to do, to say, it's a fantasy and, religion is stupid. And sometimes it is. Listen, sometimes religion is stupid. Don't get me wrong. But the idea that morality isn't universal, or that it doesn't exist at all, to me, it's the dumbest idea in philosophy. And this is why. Nobody believes it. Absolutely no one believes it. Right? When Dr. Jordan Peterson says, while Sam Harris says he's an atheist, he acts like he believes God exists. That's what they're talking about. That's what he's talking about. You can say God doesn't exist, but you can't act like God doesn't exist. And I'll give you an example. So while the professor's like, morality is stupid and doesn't exist, okay. I'll bet you anything. If after this little debate was over and he's walking on with his car and two dudes jump out of the alley and start beating the hell out of him, guess what he'd think? It was absolutely wrong. Shouldn't be doing that. He would not only think it was absolutely wrong then, he would think it would be wrong in the future, in the past, or at any place in time in history. That somebody just walking to their car or chariot or whatever the hell it is, and two dudes just come out and start beating the hell out of him and taking everything, he'd say that's wrong. Everybody thinks like that. Nobody thinks that there is no such thing as an absolute morality. I'm not even bringing up the big tragedies of history. To say that wasn't wrong, nobody believes that. Nobody looks back at the Holocaust, at slavery that's happened around the world. Nobody looks at what's going on in China with the Uyghur prison. Nobody thinks that that's okay. The idea that you can look at some tragedy or some horror happen to somebody and say that it's no big deal or it's not a moral issue, nobody believes that. But I think that's something that it's popular for academics and professors in the security of their, tenured offices to ban around those ideas as long as they don't have to deal with the consequences of them. I guarantee you, if he had had a daughter who went overseas and ended up, being captured and turned into some slave, he'd go, yeah, that's horrible. It's horrific. That shouldn't happen anytime, any place, anywhere. So when people say that morality doesn't exist, I know they're liars. I know they don't believe it. And I believe they're pulling some kind of a scam because they haven't looked at the statement and what it leads to. They clearly haven't thought about it. Nobody believes that. Just to show you that this isn't just my idea. One of the things that led me to believe that I was onto something was that there were many popular atheists, well, I don't say popular, but, prominent people who were atheists who came to the exact same conclusion. So I'm going to read you a couple of, not articles, the whole articles, but I'll read you some of an article, some articles, parts of some articles that illustrate this. This is from by a guy named Joel Marx, who was a prominent philosopher. I think he was a philosopher. And the article is called Confessions of an Ex-Moralist. And so the idea of the article, and you really should read this article, atheists, non-atheists, first idea, second idea, you should all read this article. Because what he does is he's talking about how he began like many people do. I don't believe God exists, but this is right, this is wrong, we should be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that, right? And what he comes to the conclusion is that's incongruent. You can't have it both ways. You can't say God doesn't exist or morality is stupid and then walking around and pointing at people and saying you shouldn't be doing this and you should be doing that. So he says, it starts out, he says, the day I became an atheist was the day I realized I had been a believer, okay? And what he's saying is that before he confirmed that I'm an atheist, he confirms what Dr. Jordan Peterson says. He acts as if God was real. He says, up until then, I had numbered myself among the secular atheists, and many moralists are. And he talks about how the Euthyphro dilemma, did God decree evil or did God say things? Or it's not really a dilemma, but it's convincing to a lot of people. That's fine. I should link to that. Go to Dr. William Lane Craig's website. He has a whole thing on the youthful dilemma and why it's not really a dilemma. But it says that he goes on to talk about how, the new atheist that had come about, and this is in 2011, so it's right around 9/11 when the new atheist thing kind of blew up as a reaction to 9/11. So reading now deeper into the article, he says, but then it hit me. He's talking about his epiphany. He said, is not morality like this God? In other words, could I believe that, say, the wrongness of a lie was any more intrinsic to was any more intrinsic to an intentionally deceptive utterance than beauty was to a sunset or the wonderfulness of the universe? Does it not make far more sense to suppose that all of this phenomena arise in my breast, that they're the responses of a particular sensibility to otherwise valueless events and entities? He's saying that maybe just this feeling of that something is wrong is just particular to me. Maybe it is just a subjective thing. He goes on to say, someone else might respond completely different from me, such that for him or her, the lie was permissible. The sunset was banal, the universe nothing but atoms and the void. Yet that prospect was so alien to my concept of morality that it was tantamount to there being no morality at all. For essential to morality is that its norms apply with equal legitimacy to everyone. Moral relativism, it has always seemed to me, is an oxymoron. Hence, I saw no escape from moral nihilism. And so he comes to the conclusion that if morality, it's something that you think one way and I think another way, then you're just talking about personal preferences. There's no reason that because I like hamburgers, I should expect everyone to like hamburgers. It's a subjective feeling for me. In the same way, if I think X is wrong, and it's just my own moral preference, and other people can have a different moral preference, then I couldn't get upset about it when somebody does something. I mean, I may not like it, but I can't say that they did anything wrong, because they may be just acting out their own moral code. So like this guy here says, if morality isn't objective, it just doesn't exist at all. And that's when he came to final, and if you read all the way down to the bottom, he just basically says, listen, there's no such thing as morality. People don't do things that are right or wrong. They just do things I like or things I don't like. Right? He follows the atheist ideology, in my opinion, to its logical conclusion. If God isn't real, then there really isn't anything that's right or wrong. Do what you want to do what you don't want to do. But you can't call any of it right or wrong, even when other people are doing things that you think are wrong. That's how they feel about it. It's all subjective. But let me again, I'll show you now Michael Roos. This is an example of, in my opinion, the dishonest way. I shouldn't say dishonest. The totally fallacious way of trying to figure out this, I want to be an atheist, but I also want to say there's good and bad in the world. Okay. So he's talking about, it's an article I found it in The Guardian. And the headline says, God is dead, long live morality. Okay. So it starts out, what can Darwin teach us about morality? That's the question he's answering. So it says, God is dead, why should I be good? The answer is that there are no grounds whatsoever for being good. Okay, so if God is dead, then there's really no reason to be good. That's not really true. There's actually no such thing as good, but similar idea. He says there's no ecclesiastical headmaster, there's no celestial headmaster who's going to give you 6 or 6 million or 6 billion of the best if you're bad, or morality is flim flam. That's what he comes to the conclusion. There's no such thing, right? This is another dumb idea, okay? Now, does this mean that you can just go out and rape and pillage and behave like an ancient Roman grabbing Sabine women? Not at all. I said that there are no grounds for being good. Here's the crazy part. It doesn't follow that you should be bad. Okay. Indeed, there are those, and I'm one, who argue that only by recognizing the death of God can we possibly do that which we should. Right? He's trying to cross the is-ought gap. He's telling you what you should do. Okay, let's go. We behave properly to our fellow humans and perhaps save the planet that we all share. So we should be saving the planet. Okay. We can give up all of that nonsense about women and gay people being inferior, about fertilized ova being human beings. Very important. And about the earth being ours to exploit and destroy. Now, Michael Ruse, clearly a very liberal person. At least that's what it seems to me, right? The gays, the women thing, the save the planet, all the things that the left loves. Which is okay. Nothing wrong with that. I'm simply saying, I'm sure there are people who don't believe in God who are very conservative. So I'm just simply pointing out what I see here. But let's look at it. He's telling us that we should do these things. The question is why? Because Michael Ruse said so? I mean, Michael Ruse clearly thinks that these things are quote unquote good. But then the question is, what makes something good? I mean, I know he likes these things. I know that's what he wants. But what makes that good? Unless you want to argue that whatever Michael Ruse wants equals objectively good, meaning everybody should think it's good. Does Michael Ruse have that kind of knowledge and power and authority? I mean, should we just believe it? Listen, if we're having questions, if there's two countries that are warring and they're like, we don't know what to do, should they call Michael Ruse because he's the arbiter of what is good and what is not? See, I don't think so. See, there's a problem when you get rid of God. Now human beings become God. Now they may say, I'm God of my own universe. Oh, no. They're not going to stop there. They want to be God of your world too. Look what he says in that last sentence. We can give up this nonsense about fertilized ova being human beings. So Michael Ruse has the power to declare who is a human being and who is not a human being. That's being good, according to Michael Ruse. See, you can get rid of God. You can deny that he exists. But like I'm telling you, you'll always have a God that you bow down to. And what Michael Ruse wants you to think is, I'm God. I'll tell you what's right. I'll tell you what's wrong. I'll tell you why you should be good. I don't think that he's that guy. I just don't. You might agree with some of these things. You may agree with all of those things. Or you may disagree with some or all of those things. But here's the problem. If there's no objective standard that applies to everyone, morality doesn't exist. And so now you can't even say this is good or bad. So what Michael Ruse is trying to do, and this, in my opinion, is and again, I don't want to say dishonesty because I don't think it's dishonesty, but there's a gap in logic and reasoning when you say God doesn't exist, but you should be good. Because I don't know what good is anymore. I mean, at least I don't know how you define what good is. It's like saying, you know what? There's no such thing as water or liquids of any kind, but you know what? Let's go swimming and have a lemonade. You can't do that. You can't say something doesn't exist, but now let's go do it. And that's what he seems to be doing in this article. And so, in my opinion, it seems that there's two kinds. I shouldn't say that's not right. But there seems to be a couple of forms of atheism. Those atheists that logically work out the God doesn't exist ideology to its logical conclusion. And then you have people like Stephen Hicks, who I love, right? Michael Ruse, who is a highly regarded philosopher, who, in my opinion, just don't do it. They want to hold on to the things that can only be true if God is real. but they want to deny God. And in my opinion, I think that's really what's at the bottom of the second idea. Because all of these people have some idea of the perfect world. But I think what the second idea says is, I want the perfect world, I want heaven, but I don't want God. I want heaven, but I don't want God. I think that's what the second idea is all about. It's a group of people who, I shouldn't say a group of people, that's minimizing, I don't want to minimize it, but people who deny the existence of God, yet still walk out in the world and say, this is good and that is bad, are trying to impose some utopia without God. And it just doesn't seem to me that atheism has the philosophical material to build the scaffolding to have a morality. You have to get that from the first idea. It's the only place you can get it from, it seems to me. And I think that the first guy that I read that wrote the article, The Confessions of an Ex-Moralist, I think he says the same thing. Many people say the same thing. Who was the other guy? Oh, I can't think of his name right now. But, there's a whole lot of folks that are atheists who go, yeah, once you get rid of God, the whole idea of good and bad goes out the window. And I don't think that the people who are enlightened folks, I just don't think that they seriously contend with that. I just don't think they do at all. So as I say, I agree with Stephen Hicks. Love his ideas on liberty. I love his idea on business. But when it comes to the enlightenment philosophy, if he's going to say that there is no God, no ultimate arbiter of right and wrong, good and bad, then I don't know why postmodernism, I shouldn't say I don't know why, postmodernism clearly wins the day. That's what it seems to me. So, all right, that's enough of me. So thanks again for tuning in. Look at me on the other place. Before I go, I wanted to recommend this book. This book, The Vision of the Anointed by Thomas Sowell, it's a stunning book. What is that? Vision of the Anointed, Thomas Sowell, right in there. Without even bringing up God or religion or any of that stuff, he begins to really dig into and dissect the motivations and I think ideas behind conservative and liberal people and policymakers. The thrill for me as I was reading this book is you start seeing these first and second idea comparisons just pop right out. Now that might be just because that's in the mindset that I'm in and other people read and never see that kind of stuff. But I got to tell you, fantastic book. It's written so even a dummy like me can read it, which I love about Thomas Sowell. Anybody can pick up a Thomas Sowell book and get stuff out of it. So get Vision of the Anointed. Get it immediately. I'll put a link at the bottom of wherever they put them. And thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate you hanging around. All right, that's enough of me. I'm out of here.